This afternoon in Washington, Donald Trump took office as the most unpopular president in the history of American polling. The change of power has been met with protests locally and around the country, with more to follow. But the transition also poses a challenge for the Democratic Party and even Republicans in Massachusetts. Joining us with some inaugural thoughts is a reporter from Politico Massachusetts, Lauren Dezenski. Thank you very much for being with us, Lauren.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, your impressions about watching this whole transition this morning, at least on television?
It was very much, I think there were a lot of expectations and very low expectations for this speech and the way everything was delivered. And I think Donald Trump tried to speak to the nation in the best way that he could. It was less I, it was more we. There was a lot of emphasis on patriotism. The way in which he said some things, about how, we need to take our country back. This is, the specific phrasing kind of escapes me, but, he's basically speaking to how the American people are now taking Washington back. And that's a potent message for a lot of the people, that voted for him.
Well, the anti-establishment part is familiar. Lots of politicians invoke that. And, but when he says, we're taking it back, well, whose was it before?
President Obama. And I think, I think President Trump, going forward, will try and hang a lot of the actions that he takes and the decisions that he makes as a rebuke to President Barack Obama. And I think some of that lends itself to the fact that Hillary Clinton ran on continuing the Obama legacy. And so Donald Trump sees his victory, which he's still kind of trying to justify a little bit, as a rebuke to the Obama legacy. And, he's doing this, and the voters that elected him, a lot of them, were not supportive of Obama's policies.
Well, one of the things that also struck me in this speech is the contrast between the hope from many people in his base who want those jobs to come back. And believe me, I believe those stories. But, when he's talking about today, it's like, all this, the dark hour of the nation, the carnage on the street. That's pretty strong language.
Absolutely. This is also language that he's used throughout the campaign trail. And, you saw some criticism that he was kind of delivering a campaign speech to a certain extent. He didn't use quite the same imagery and language that he used on the campaign trail. And, the way that he described Detroit was a little bit surprising because he seemed a little bit more generous than he had seemed before November 8th. But again, this speaks to how Donald Trump has his worldview and how he sees the country. And I think it very much stands to be seen how his policies will then impact these different swaths of America.
Well, one thing that I've heard that people have noted was missing from the speech was that sense of global mission, especially we used to get it from Kennedy and Obama, even from Ronald Reagan. It wasn't there.
Right. It's America first under the Donald Trump presidency, and that's really what he drove home, whether it was the patriotism or whether it's putting the country first with trade deals and things like that. That's kind of what he ran on. And so, he's really putting those statements out there. And, this speech was a statement not only to the American people, but to the world. And he's made his priorities clear.
Can you contrast this moment with the state of things about, if not 8 years ago, then 4 years ago during the Obama inauguration? I know there were people who couldn't stand Obama from the get-go. We had the Tea Party starting up almost as soon as he got elected. But look at all these things going on around the country now. Is this different?
I think it's fair to say that the divisions that existed in our country during the Obama administration that certainly grew are even greater going into the new administration. Look at the scene outside of the inauguration that we just saw today, and contrast that with what we saw in the Obama presidency. There's more protesters than supporters, at least as far as we can tell, and based off of the expected numbers for the Women's March tomorrow. There's violence in the streets, whether it's anarchists and things like that. One of the interesting contrasts that I noticed before the inauguration actually began was that I was listening to this on NPR, and you heard the sound of tear gas canisters being shot off by police into crowds of people that were rioting and smashing windows, and this is basic crowd control. But in the background, you hear the inauguration music playing, and that's just such a fascinating juxtaposition to the beginning of the Trump administration that absolutely these divisions existed and grew under the Obama administration, but you didn't see that, 4 years ago. So this is certainly something that every single president is going to have to deal with. And preaching a message of patriotism and assuming that the country will then rally around that is a different kind of tactic that we're going to see.
Well, there are high expectations, especially for the women's marches. They've also been billed as a great networking opportunity, but is there more substance to it?
I mean, this is a chance and an opportunity for women and people who identify with women's issues and, people who are just opposed to the Trump presidency to come out and say something. And I think for a lot of people, they see President Trump's electoral college win, but his loss of the popular vote as kind of their opening and way to do something and say something. And I think, you see this, whether it's activists or kind of people in the middle, people want something to do, and people want a way to respond to the Trump administration. It's not just something to, it's a way to get out and to do something and to say something. And I think in Massachusetts, we see that more so just simply because this is a little bit more of a bastion of Democratic support here. And there is a little bit more of a history and kind of a cultural acceptance toward protesting, and like we saw it with Occupy. Obviously, it's more people that are involved in this, but this is a way for people to voice opposition and kind of stand up to an incoming Trump administration.
Well, you have Occupy and even the Tea Party on the other side, both shaping the actions of major parties. But then again, you see somebody, one of the leading Democrats in Massachusetts, Joe Kennedy, he's trying to shape things, and I guess it just didn't really go over that well. You covered that meeting, right?
Yeah, so Joe Kennedy,
the
Congressman Joe Kennedy III, convened a meeting for activists in his district to basically say, all right, Trump won, what are the next steps? How do we move forward? And so he gets up, he delivers a speech basically saying, we need to be the city on the hill of sorts, and, if we want to do it right, Massachusetts needs to be the example that we can all point to from Washington. And then the next step is also to meet with Trump supporters and to talk to them and understand, what they like about our new president and, to kind of have a conversation. Totally normal and positive things to suggest. And I think any Democrat would be suggesting the same thing. But a lot of the activists at this meeting in Newton, after a while, they just kind of said, we want to do something else. We want something more. There were some that, basically said, there are a lot of different issues, but some of them said, well, what if we, protested, the governor's office next week? They were looking for something else. And I think a lot of what the Democrats need to figure out and what Joe Kennedy tried to do, and, he also left the meeting 20 minutes into it, which then left people not feeling good. But one of the things that Democrats need to do is to identify what they want going forward. And having these conversations is difficult, but they've got to figure out something, to go against, this Trump administration. And I think we're going to see only more rallies and only more kind of public shows of support. We saw the rally in support of the Affordable Care Act 2 weekends ago. We're seeing the Women's March. Clearly, this is something that people want to do. And if there's a sense of results and a sense of action, that will only encourage that.
We're talking with Lauren Dezenski from POLITICO Massachusetts, and this, of course, is BNN News. Lauren, what about Charlie Baker? Because he didn't back Trump, at least not publicly, and Trump probably has little reason to help him. But the downside of that is that that increases the odds that we could have a Democratic governor the next time around.
So Charlie Baker is in an extremely difficult position, and that was only made more so after Trump actually won. He stuck his neck out in saying that he wasn't going to support Donald Trump, and to a certain extent, he, like most of us, was eyeing a Democratic president, and that would have won him favor. At the end of the day, though, there's a couple different things at play, right? We still don't know what a Donald Trump administration is actually going to do. Look at these confirmation hearings. Look at the things that these different leaders are saying. Everyone is kind of contradicting themselves, and no one will really know what this administration does basically until they do it. Even Twitter isn't necessarily that much of an insight into what the president is thinking. At the same time, Charlie Baker is still arguably the most popular Republican governor in the country. If the Republican Party, kind of separate from Donald Trump, is looking for a way forward and kind of a way toward the moderates, Charlie Baker still represents that regardless of what he does. And so he still will have some leverage and a way to kind of come to the table in a way that, we're seeing invites to inaugural balls with Mike Pence and, selfies and things like that. That's not going to go away. And Charlie Baker has also made it clear that he wants a seat at the table. He's going to the Republican Governors Association meetings. He's speaking out against getting rid of the Affordable Care Act, but he's trying to walk a line. And honestly, that's all he can really do right now until we actually understand the contours of what this administration is going to do. He's kind of just trying to walk the line. And Democrats are going to hammer him for it. Democrats are going to try and tie him to every single thing that Donald Trump does. And it's up to Charlie Baker to basically stake out his issues, justify why he does it, and ultimately say it's for the best of the Commonwealth. And that's it.
Of course, the other thing that changes with Trump in the White House is that now we're exposed to the full force of Republican control of Congress. That was a long story that was done state by state with redistricting. Mm-hmm. What about the Democrats? Do they have a game plan to contend with that?
I mean, clearly they're trying to, based off of conversations that I've had with members of Congress, they're trying to kind of stake out positions that would make sense for opposition. They can't just say no just for the sake of saying no. They need to kind of do it smart. Also because they have a state where they need to maintain federal funding, whether it's for for healthcare research, whether it's for, the military and all of our, military bases, whether it's for university funding, whether it's for healthcare. There are certain deals that need to be made, and Democrats will also need to thread the needle of opposing a Republican administration or opposing Donald Trump in a way that, we saw Catherine Clark decide not to go to the inauguration. Same thing with Michael Capuano, but also try to work out deals. And if Republicans in Congress pursue an infrastructure bill, the Democrats need to make sure that Massachusetts gets a slice of that too.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Lauren Dezenski from POLITICO Massachusetts. We'll have more news in just a moment.